Welcome, wanderer, to the Vampire Archives. Today we revel in an unusual tale, the vampire on the Florida Trail. Deep within the untamed wilderness of the Florida Trail, university students Michael Jernigan and Julie Renfroe set out for a peaceful hike, unaware that their journey will plunge them into an eerie nightmare. When they encounter a strange veiled hiker with an unsettling fascination for nature's cruelties, their unease quickly turns to terror. As the wilderness darkens around them, they bear witness to something unspeakable, a grotesque ritual that blurs the line between man and predator.
Not too many people have ever heard of the Florida Trail. It's a nature trail, about 1,500 miles long, that winds its way from the western edge of Florida, through the Panhandle, and down the length of the peninsula, finally ending in Big Cypress National Preserve, a little bit west of Miami. It's not as famous as the Appalachian Trail, but according to my sources, well-traveled by nature lovers from all over. Instead of mountains, the hiker gets to see unique environments not seen anywhere else in the world. Last summer, my girlfriend and I decided to hike a portion of the Florida Trail. My name is Michael, and my girlfriend's name is Julie. We are both university students in Tallahassee, Florida. We are also both nature lovers. Whenever we can, we love to hike and see the undiscovered beauty of our country. We were really looking forward to this hike. Early on a Saturday morning, we packed some hiking gear into my truck and excitedly headed out, briefly stopping at McDonald's for some breakfast sandwiches. We joined the trail at a point where it passes through the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, about 30 miles or so south of Tallahassee. Since we only had one day to devote to this adventure, our plans were to hike until noon, stop and eat the sandwiches we carried in our backpacks, then turn around and retrace our steps back to our starting point. Little did we know that our adventure would take a far darker turn than we had ever imagined. As we started, the trail seemed alive with growth. Newly sprouting tropical-looking plants were popping up everywhere in the leaf mold. Plants that I can't identify were blooming. We spent most of the morning leisurely walking through what seemed to us primordial landscapes, fully expecting to see a Florida black bear, or maybe even the famously elusive Florida panther. We were careful about looking for snakes and tried spotting alligators in the small scattering of ponds we passed by. We felt like we were in some kind of land that time forgot. About mid-morning in the distance, we spotted another hiker on the trail headed in our direction. He wore a long-sleeved khaki shirt, long pants, and gloves covering his hands, attire that seemed a little odd for the climate. He also wore a wide-brimmed hat from which mosquito netting descended, covering his face, and had a large machete dangling from his belt. As he approached, my girlfriend slipped behind me, and we both moved to the side to let him pass us. Then I heard my girlfriend scream. Turning quickly, I saw her, frozen in place, staring upwards. My eyes shifted, following her gaze. There, just above our heads on thorny limbs, hung the lifeless bodies of about a dozen different birds in various stages of decay. An eerie sight if I ever saw one. I became transfixed as well. Then the stranger spoke.
"Oh, I see you've discovered the butcherbird's lair."
"The what?" I sputtered. "The butcherbird." He repeated himself a little more emphatically and smiled. Through the mosquito netting covering his face, I could see that he had a mouthful of cruelly misshapen teeth. It's an amusing little bird that we have here in Florida, also known as the loggerhead shrike. I glanced upwards again and spotted red feathers, the shriveled corpse of one of my favorite birds, a cardinal. I glanced in my girlfriend's direction. She seemed to be shrinking in size, her face averted and downcast.
"I'm quite surprised that I don't see a few mice hanging up there. This butcherbird must be a picky eater. I'm sort of a volunteer trail advisor. I spend a lot of time in these woods, and know quite a bit about the wildlife in this area. The butcherbird, both resourceful and resilient, kills its victims and hangs them in what I can only call a larder, so that it can come back later and feed on them."
Sensing my girlfriend's discomfort, I reached and took her hand. This self-proclaimed wildlife expert here, however, was just warming up to his subject. The butcherbird grasps its prey by the back of the neck with its pointed beak, pinches the spinal cord to induce paralysis, and then vigorously shakes its victim with enough force to break its neck. Nature at its finest. It has a little black mask around its eyes, just like the one a raccoon has, and yes, he is definitely a little bandit. He then turned toward my girlfriend and said, "Aw, honey, don't look so distraught. This is nature. You have stumbled into his territory now, and in nature, everything's got to eat." I didn't let on that this whole scenario was creeping me out. We at this point hadn't introduced ourselves, and I was perfectly okay with keeping it that way. I didn't know who was creeping me out the most, the butcherbird or this stranger. So, looking in the direction we wanted to hike and trying to conceal any strain that might be in my voice, I said, "That's interesting, but we really need to keep moving." Without another word, I turned and nudged Julie away from this weirdo. As we walked away, I thought I heard him say, "Keep smiling." I looked back over my shoulder to see him waving and continuing to call to us. Keep smiling, keep smiling. We continued hiking until about noon, then stopped to eat the sandwiches we had brought in our backpacks. Our conversation turned to the strange hiker who we were by this time calling Nature Boy. Neither of us could shake the feeling that there was something very weird about him. We both began to feel a change in the forest around us which destroyed the enthusiasm we had felt all morning long. Our exciting hike was over. The air became thick with an eerie stillness. Graceful oaks that had once provided welcoming shade from the midday sun now looked spooky, with gnarled, twisted limbs ending in branches draped in tattered Spanish moss that reached like skeletal fingers to block out the sun and casting shifting shadows that slithered across the ground. It's a good thing we remembered to bring mosquito repellent with us. Those little bloodsuckers were beginning to swarm out of the shadows and bite. We started the return leg of our hike, seeing things in a different perspective. Razor-edged palmetto fronds jutted out from the undergrowth like spectral claws, and the earth beneath seemed stagnant, littered with decaying leaves and remnants of something long forgotten. I kept thinking, this is the Florida that the Spanish conquistadors saw when they first arrived. This is the Florida that the Native Americans embraced as their home. The twisted path we had walked earlier now seemed to dissolve into tangled darkness, where unseen creatures stirred just beyond sight. Silence reigned, broken only by the distant snap of a twig, a sound that vanished as quickly as it came. In this shadowed grove, time felt irrelevant, swallowed by an ancient presence that seemed to be lingering, waiting. We again passed underneath the butcherbird's lair and stopped this time for a more private inspection. To our surprise, there hopping among the branches was a little bird with a whitish head, and it had a black mask around its eyes. It didn't look fierce or strong enough to have killed these other birds and then hung their bodies up in the tree branches. My girlfriend said,
"It looks kinda cute."
"You might want to ask those other birds up there how cute he is."
Cute and deadly is probably what they'd tell you.
I hope we don't run into Nature Boy again. We continued our hike back to my truck when, up ahead, we heard noises. Wanting to avoid another encounter with Nature Boy, we left the established trail and followed a side path, ending up on the banks of a bayou running through the woods. There he was again, Nature Boy, the same hiker we had encountered earlier. He was standing on the opposite bank and a little bit downstream from us. We ducked behind some massive cypress trees. I peered around a tree and watched in fascination as an alligator swam toward him. It approached slowly and without any sense of fear. It had something in its mouth, an offering perhaps. When it reached the shore at Nature Boy's feet, he reached down and took what appeared to be a large swamp-dwelling rodent of some kind from its jaws. He lifted the mosquito netting from his face, raised the lifeless rodent to his mouth, sunk his face into the fur on the back of its neck, bit down, and sucked greedily. My stomach churned. I slipped back behind the tree and sunk down on the ground beside my girlfriend. "Don't look," I said. "Just don't look." After a while I gathered the courage to again peek around the tree. "He's still there," I whispered. I watched spellbound as he withdrew the machete from its holster and butchered the small animal into chunks. Then he tossed them one by one to the gator. With each toss I heard him say, "Keep smiling. Keep smiling." I slipped back behind the tree again to find that I was alone. Julie had seen more than she wanted to. She was already on the trail headed for my truck. I caught up to her soon enough, quickly grabbed her hand and said, "Let's get out of here now." We couldn't reach the truck fast enough. We knew that was one dude we never wanted to see again.
Thank you, Wanderer, for venturing into the depths of the vampire archives. Let us hear from you. Comment. Is there perhaps another tale that you might like for us to retrieve for you before we vanish into the shadows of darkness?